Did you get a haircut?
I did, and I got new glasses.
Oh, you did get new. I like your glasses.
Hey,
they look great on
thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Do you not get frames very often?
Those last frames, I think, are from like 2014. Yeah. I said to my dad, I like your frames. And I was in Florida with him, and he said, come on, we'll go to my guy. So I drive up. Such a guy's got them. And so I got the same frames as my dad, and he really liked that. And I kind of liked it. It was kind of sweet, you know. Nice glasses, nice glasses.
That was cute.
Yeah. Jimmy, have you ever heard of Thomas Weddell-Weddelsburg? I don't think he'd appreciate you laughing at his name.
I know. I'm laughing because even the question indicates if you heard of Thomas Weddell-Weddelsburg, you don't have to ask that question because his name is Weddell-Weddelsburg.
I know you'd be like, oh, Weddell-Weddelsburg? Of course.
That's Professor
Weddell-Weddelsburg.
Goodness gracious.
I actually got to meet him. He was in the Seattle area training. I think it was Amazon folks. He does Amazon, he does Microsoft, he does the U.S. Army. And he talks about, are you solving the right problem? And he uses an example of an elevator to really engage his audience. And so he asked us, okay, you're the owner of a building and your tenants are complaining about the elevator, that it's old and it's slow, they have to wait a lot, and they're threatening to break their leases if you don't fix it. And he watches, as you might imagine, everybody's immediately jumping towards solving the problem. We better install a new elevator. We better put in a new motor. He talks about reframing the problem to better understand what is actually the issue. And so in this scenario, he talks about the fact that basically it comes down to people just hate waiting. And so the elevator's as fast as it always has been, but they don't like waiting. And so then sort of the solution can be play music, install a hand sanitizer, put up a mirror. And so I started to think about this also when it came to our guest today, because I really felt that in a lot of ways, he helps reframe or to rethink that you shouldn't fall right into your default, which is maybe to immediately go in to try to solve the problem. And he urges, just as, and I love saying it, Dr. Weddell-Weddelsburg will say, to really engage your community, harvest the wisdom, find out what is really the issue before you try to solve that problem. So anyhow, that's why I ask, do you know who he is? Because I think you would enjoy meeting him. We should probably get him on the podcast.
Yeah, I would enjoy. We should for the very sake of saying his name more than once.
Oh my God. He'd be like, you could just call me Thomas. No, Thomas Weddell-Weddelsburg. I'm really glad you're here. Where did we find you today, Thomas Weddell-Weddelsburg? What does the term an imperfect leader mean to you, Thomas Weddell-Weddelsburg?
I'm going to ignore your request in order to assure that I get to say the name more than once. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one.
Our guest, Larry Dake, he talks about empathy and understanding as a real challenge and as something that is so essential when it comes to leadership. He said, I think, this is in talking about his own scenario, when he said, I think what got overlooked was empathy. I didn't have the requisite level of empathy to think about what was best for everyone in the situation. He, like Thomas Weddell-Weddelsburg, jumped to a solution before really listening to how the decision was going to impact the family and mostly the child. I thought that was pretty powerful because it hits home. Our audience is going to hear Larry tell us about something called the default setting. And that really was pretty meaningful for me. I don't know. What are you thinking?
I have a personal question, 2 personal questions. You could decide which one you want to answer. And I have a feeling I know which one you'll answer. First one is, what's something that you have changed your default setting on in your life? And then number 2, your example when you came early and you would be working and you would say, yeah, I have time, but you wouldn't stop working.
I wouldn't even look up.
So here's what I've noticed in getting to know you and getting to be your friend, which is so wonderful. I love this. It's one of my favorite things.
I feel the same way.
This is who you are. You're so excited about every idea and the next thing, the next person. It's like I'm so drawn to the excitement that you have for this moment. But it's 3:30 my time, or 3:30 your time. When it hits 3:55, I start thinking, oh, he's ready to turn to the next person or idea. So I do wonder How does that show up at home? Like this behavior that you did early in the morning, you did it to people who came to work with you. I'm guessing this is a behavior that you have at home.
I would tell you that it absolutely is something I am so rigid in with time. Time is the most rigid thing for me, and it drives people crazy. If we're going to leave for the airport at 3, they know I'm actually wanting to leave at 2:30. So then at 2:15, they're all sort of scrambling. And this is how I was socialized. Just people so just absurd about time. And it would be great if I could relax. And so you're right. I am mindful of the clock. Much of it, I hope you recognize also, is trying to be respectful of your time. It's like, oh, we've got an hour. And even though you told me from the very beginning, hey, look, time for me is if I'm in a conversation, I'm okay. For me, it's being respectful. Like, oh, I booked 3 to 4. So I know at 3:55, I better start talking about, hey, let's figure out where we're going to be next week. What time next week? Let's go. Yeah. So now I'm just going to talk to fucking 5:30, 6 o'clock. Get ready, asshole.
That's the default setting that you haven't shifted. You know it exists. There have been interruptions, but it hasn't shifted fully for you.
How about this? Let's get to the conversation with Larry Dake, and then I will tell you of a default that has shifted for me. This is the one where Larry's empathy statement really hit home. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question, because I know you are. Empath Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with Empath Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. Empath Speech, EMPAT speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Larry Dake, Superintendent of Schools for the Chenango Valley Central School District in Binghamton, New York. And since 2011, he has served in leadership roles including overseeing curriculum, data. He's been an assistant superintendent. He taught social studies. He coached varsity girls basketball in the Vestal Central School District. Larry, I am so excited that you're here. So welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Great, Peter. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to spend some time with you. I've been a listener for a long time, so it's really an honor to be on. So thank you.
We're thrilled to have you. And I want to start actually in something that is super important for superintendents always, and even more so now. Your expertise in crisis management and leadership has really made you the perfect guest to discuss these challenges and lessons with us. And I wonder, because not only are you a superintendent, but you're also an author. And in your books, you offer really invaluable lessons and insights for school leaders who are facing complex issues. And I use that word complex as different from complicated. Complicated certainly has an answer. It's just hard sometimes to get there. Complex is often there's no right answer, and it's a lot of good intentions working towards just a meaningful solution. So can you tell us about your books? Crisis Management, Effective School Leadership to Avoid Early Burnout, and Identifying Small Habits. Left unchecked by school leaders, small faults can become major cracks. Those are awesome titles, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And really, the two books were written sort of they were written within close proximity to each other, but also as my thinking and leadership evolved, and really the writing process for me has been ultimately my own professional development. The process for me to go through the research to really do some thinking has made me, I think, more effective and more reflective as a leader. And so the other part of my career that I'm really passionate about is I've been an adjunct professor in the Binghamton University Educational Leadership Program since 2017. And I'm a graduate of that program. I was a very young administrator. My first position was at age 30. I did not have a long runway in teaching, although I think in my teaching career, I taught many different classes. Like I said, I was a coach, which is really a cauldron to learn about communication with parents and different groups. I advised many clubs. So I feel like I packed a lot in that small time. but still admittedly, and today as well, have and had a lot to learn. And so the first book about crisis management was really intended after teaching in that program for a number of years and really thinking about when new leaders get into the field. So they land that first administrative job, they finish their program, maybe they had a great internship and they're ready to run through that wall and change the world. What are the things that make or break leaders in that moment in their career? And as I taught in the program, multiple courses, I've taught the assessment course, I've taught the leadership theory course, I've been an assistant superintendent in charge of HR, contracts, legal disputes, and also in charge of budget as well. And so what I started conveying to students was the things that make or break you in that first assistant principalship, or maybe you're in a lower level district office position, maybe you're an instructional coach. Chances are you're not the one with your finger on the budget. You're not the one deciding curriculum. You're not the one that when something really hits the fan legally with a staff member or a student are making the final decision. You need to know who to call, don't get me wrong, and learn, but it's really your interpersonal relationships. It's really how you present yourself. It's really your willingness to learn. And it's also really your willingness to understand that it's important to be in the right fit to the best extent possible. And so a lot of the stories in the crisis management book are about leaders, and these are real leaders from different parts of New York State that obviously agreed to this and aren't identified in any way, but they found themselves in situations where that professional and personal fit did not match. And I have always felt that sometimes it's not perfect. And we all have days where we think like, oh my God, what am I doing here sometimes? But if more often than not, you're not feeling like that's the right fit for you, you're not going to be able to do your best work and navigate the situations that are going to come up. So a lot of the stories in that book are about leaders who were making a career move, or maybe they were tapped on the shoulder to be promoted. And listen, that sounds really great. I've often made it akin to being on The Bachelor and someone wants to give you the rose and you're dating in Mallorca and everyone is making meals for you and you're eating on the beach every night. Of course you're going to fall in love. And then you go back and you're doing laundry and you're in your own house and maybe there's children involved and all of a sudden it's real life. So I have always encouraged people, if you get that tap on the shoulder or you feel that pull to you're the assistant principal, your superintendent wants you to become the principal, it's wonderful. Obviously have the conversation, but give it a couple of days in real life to think about, is that going to be the right fit for me right now? And those are the things that I've seen make or break young leaders, early career leaders. There's a principalship 45 miles away. They've got a young family. Again, they want to run through that wall. The district really wants them, and they take it, and it ends up being really messy with their personal professional fit.
You're really talking about the romanticized versus the reality. There's ego involved to some extent. You're kind of excited that somebody saw your talent and recognized you and thought that you'd be ready. Similarly, had an example in Oakland, California. I was an assistant principal. I really wanted to be a principal, and I almost was like lobbying the superintendent who was teaching a graduate course. So I had a weekly interaction with him, and I was like, come on, I think I'm ready. And he offered me a school that when I asked around, they said, oh, that's a career killer. What are you doing? I mean, it's not a place where you go for your first assignment. It's where you go when you have really demonstrated strong leadership skills and you're ready to be a part of a community that is hungry for change, not something where you're going to make lots of mistakes.
You probably had the best of intentions, right? Like they feel like, sometimes it's they want you to be in that position. And whether it's good or bad, it's important to understand there's an agenda there.
Sure. Right? Looking back, I have to imagine he said, here's a guy with a lot of energy, good ideas, he's personable. And maybe we've kept striking out because we put people who are sort of towards the end of their careers, and maybe here's somebody who's at the beginning who's really going to do some wonderful things. What have we got to lose, kind of thing. But I'm really glad for those. I imagine that as part of your advice as well is get a beat on the system. You asked me before we even hit record. I was telling you about the mascot of one of our high schools was the QP, and I was really intrigued by your first question, which is, tell me about the history of that. Sort of being really mindful that you may enter a leadership role, and you didn't develop the system. The system had existed for 200 years before you even got there, and will exist for another many hundreds of years after you're gone. So having a beat on the system and how decisions were made will certainly put you in a good position as you seek to make certain changes. You have to understand where you've been to know where you're going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other piece of the crisis management book is that it's really about interpersonal relationships. And there are lots and lots of people that can develop a brilliant master schedule, or they're really good with data, or they're brilliant when it comes to curriculum, but none of that happens without a relationship. So one of the things that I've started doing in my new district in Chenango Valley, one of the reasons I was attracted to be here is that my office is not only in the middle school, high school building, it's a 612 campus with about 800 students, but it's really in the heart of the building. It's not shunted off to the side. So I open my door and I'm in the main hallway, and I can get out there with a mobile desk, and I can be out there at lunch. And if I don't need to be in my office, I can be just around. And I would say every single week, there's 3 to 5 actionable conversations I have with a staff member or a student, or I've recruited substitute teachers that way that come into the building. And if I were sitting in my desk doing the exact same thing I was doing out there, they would have never happened. And so, that's a really great way. I heard it be called management by walking around, but being really strategic about being in positions to have conversations, because you'll learn a lot that way. For example, I ran into our French teacher a week ago out there, just happened, and we have many pleasant conversations, but I said, hey, French exchange is coming up. What can I do to help? And I learned 3 things that had been barriers for her in the past, how many years she's been doing the exchange? 20. It's a long-standing program in our district. And these are not big things. These are things that we can absolutely, like, should the French students have to pay to go to the football game? Of course they shouldn't. Or the host families who are already doing a ton. So again, little things I never would have known, but they go a long way for the staff members that you're engaging with. So just that visibility and being cognizant of your own proximity as a leader is really important for everyone to understand, but I think often early career leaders for sure.
Let me just pause and welcome you if you're just joining us. Our guest today is Dr. Larry Dake, Superintendent of Schools from the Chenango Valley Central School District in Binghamton, New York. So Larry, what you're really speaking to are these small habits. And so what I want to do is get into that, if that's all right. Because in the human-centered leadership model that I speak so much about, there's this dimension, nested patterns. And nested patterns are the habits or the behaviors of the organization. They ask the question, how do we want to be together? And it's really talking about that cultural field. And I really get the sense after reading a little bit of Small Habits that exactly what you're talking about in your book is that you're speaking to nested patterns. And so I pulled a couple of examples from the book. You said, a building principal who preaches personal connection yet walks up and down the halls constantly answering emails on their phone. Or leaders who rightfully address employee tardiness to work, but often show up for their own meetings 5 to 10 minutes late. Or leaders who admonish students and perhaps custodial staff for not maintaining cleanliness while walking by trash in the hallways and not picking it up. Oh my God, those are such great examples. I think anyone who's listening is, that's exactly right. I see that all the time. So would you maybe start with just the kind of advice that you give aspiring leaders about the power of attending to the small habits?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that great intro to that topic. And that piece, that book was really, so the crisis management, really written for early career people with some stories in there about how folks had navigated their own situations, some data that I collected on, wellness. The habits book was written more for people that had been in the profession. Certainly, I think for anyone, but, folks that have been in a leadership position 3 years, 5 years, fall into patterns. And none of these patterns in and of themselves make them ineffective leaders. Now, all of them put together, yes. But someone who's communicating too much by email may be a great leader, a very effective leader. But man, if they could flip some of those emails to conversations, their leadership would be so much more personal. So these are little things. And the conversations I've had with folks that have read that book and that I've been in touch with have said, I didn't even realize I was doing that. And really, that was the genesis of the book for me too. I've been an administrator for almost 10 years at that point in different types of positions and started noticing some of these things in myself. One that really comes to mind that maybe doesn't on the surface affect leadership, but it certainly affects how we approach our jobs, is not communicating, not being solid with your family at home. So I had a week this week, for example, where we had 2 open houses. I had a Board of Education meeting on Wednesday, and I had not spent more than 10 minutes with my family since probably Sunday night. But they knew that going into it. And my wife and I were able to plan accordingly, plan meals accordingly, plan pickup of all of our kids going to stuff accordingly. And then next week's a little bit lighter. And I know that if I can get out of my office a little bit earlier than normal, that's something that I'm going to do to be able to make that 5 o'clock pickup of cheer practice. So again, I think communicating that, I know in my mind, my family knows I'm away. I'm not as guilty as a leader, as guilty as a husband and father. That's just human nature. But I know that I'm going to make it up in spades. I know I've communicated it. We've got a plan. And so I feel much more mentally prepared to attend to my work at work because I know I've taken care of what I need to communicate to my family. So I think that's one of the things that I've seen as people are trying to figure out, gosh, I've got a busy family, I've got a busy job. How do I make that work? And I try to emphasize that it's never going to be perfect, but I think the key is to communicate well on all sides. And that goes the other way as well. You know, early in my career, when I'd be on vacation, you're new to a position, you want to prove yourself. I'm all access. You can reach me anytime. I learned the hard way that there's much more strategic ways to go about that. So again, when I'm away with my family now, we've got a great team here. I know I tell them if anyone calls me physically, if you call my phone, I will answer. If you email me, I may process email at some point. I'm not probably going to answer. If you text me, just if you need me, call me. That's our bat signal. If I look down on my phone and see your name, I'm going to answer the phone. But other than that, I trust that we're going to get it. And so again, I think communicating to your own staff what they can expect from you when you're away now allows me to enjoy my time with my family, because I know that unless something really dire is happening, I'm going to get a phone call. Other than that, it's stuff that I can work on when I get back. And so I think that little habit of just being really intentional with communication can go a long way towards making us effective in all areas of our life.
You know, one of the things you were saying that I had to sort of think about my own behavior, my own habits that I had to get called on was many of us will get to work very early just so we can have that quiet moment to get some work done. And people would know that I would get there super early, and that would sometimes be an opportunity for someone to come talk to me. Oh, do you have a minute? Of course you say, of course I do. And one of the things I didn't realize that I was doing was I said, of course, but I would keep working as they were talking. And that small habit that I found myself getting into this routine really had a profound negative impact on my relationship with some, because it may have been conveying, yes, I'm telling you I have time, but my actions are not demonstrating that I'm seeing you and that I am fully present for what you have to tell me. You got there early also because you knew you had something important to tell me. And I wished I had been told earlier, hey, do you know when you do that? It's really offensive.
The point is really well taken. Oftentimes we don't get told these things. We may not get told by the people that we lead because they may not know us well enough, or there's a perception that I'm criticizing the leader.
Exactly. The title sometimes interferes with the honest and genuine and authentic dialogue between two professionals. Yeah.
And in one of the chapters in the book about not playing favorites, I was very fortunate early in my time. So I'm a 33-year-old guy, building principal in an elementary school, 98% female, which is totally fine. Couple of guys. And I found myself early in that time gravitating towards, I know I can talk to this guy about the Mets game, last night. In that case, something happened, and I believe it was this is back when, we had like full functioning, you had to use the computer lab. 2013. It feels like the Stone Age. But we had the computer lab schedule come out, and I think I made it like first come, first served, but just the way it rolled out and the timing of it, that guy got the choice plum spot for kindergarten. And a woman who was on my interview committee that hired me, so had been really someone I could go to and bounce some things off of in my first few months, really valuable, came to me and let me know that, like, Larry, the perception is that you're favoring the guys because we see you go into their rooms. And I thought to myself, like, oh my gosh, I thought I was intentionally being fair to everyone. And it's not like you end up not being a leader or ghosting people, but I was more cognizant about where I was spending my time. And that's the kind of thing that had that habit continued unchecked could have really detracted from my effectiveness as a leader.
A great example. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I would, if it were socially acceptable to wear a sandwich board around with that on it, I might do that. I have always felt very strongly that I'm a work in progress, that there's a lot to learn. And I think what has guided me in that is that all of the positions that I've been in, for the most part, I have been more or less the one with the least amount of experience. So I referenced the elementary principalship. I've been a high school teacher. I'd done a brief stint in kind of an all-encompassing data, professional development, curriculum role in a large district. And just by the nature of that position, spent a lot of time in elementary school. So I got to know elementary systems. But when I became that principal at a young age, I had teachers literally that had been teaching longer than I had been alive. And so I'm not walking into that teacher's classroom and saying, let me tell you how to teach third grade. So I really, and I always have presented myself this way. And I remember in my interview talking about this, I've got to learn from all of you. My wife is an elementary literacy teacher. So through those kinds of conversations, I feel pretty good about at least knowing what questions to ask. But I really had to learn a lot about the elementary educational world, the culture, the milieu, all of it in a short period of time. And I did that by having conversations. And every time I went in for an observation, looking at it as I'm observing you, yes, and I'm sure there's things we can work on together. But boy, tell me how you got to the decision to teach it that way. Or I noticed you had this group of 4 over here. Why did you do that? And it led to some really great conversations, but I was also learning. And then I became an assistant superintendent at a very young age, now working on contracts and talking to attorneys and being at bargaining tables. Again, a lot to learn. So I have had to go into every situation and really learn quickly. And I think that has just made this idea of being imperfect, of being vulnerable, of being a work in progress, knowing that we've got a great team. Everything is figure-outable. There's a sign behind me that says that, but it doesn't mean I'm the one unilaterally doing the figuring out. There's a team approach to that. So to me, being an imperfect leader is recognition that no one person does it alone, that it takes a team. And to finish that thought, going back to the early career work, that's also a pitfall I've seen early leaders make, is that they think they gotta figure it out and they're not willing to be vulnerable enough. Especially when you're in that phase of how do I prove myself to my people, I found that counterintuitively, bringing people on board and asking for their opinion and valuing their feedback is much more welcomed than being the person with the answer.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Dr. Larry Dake, the Superintendent of Schools for the Chenango Valley Central School District in Binghamton, New York. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision they made, and then we discuss it. So what did you learn? What happened? Tell me better.
Yeah, so I had a situation when I was a building principal that involved a student that we had been working heavily on in terms of managing their behavior. You know, student had an IEP, we had done behavioral improvement plans, we had done a lot of work, and an incident happened that really escalated it. And internally, we had made the decision that this student was going to attend an alternative placement instead of our school. And I did not appreciate at that time how important, and this is going to sound ridiculous when I say it, but how important that kind of conversation is to a family. You know, when you're changing the location of a student's education and how that is messaged, the why, and in this case, the communication was so poor that, and this really blew it up. The communication on my end was so poor that family ended up finding out because our bus garage called them to change the bus time. And really, I look back on it and I'm ashamed of how that played out. But as I lived with that over these years and deconstructed it, the importance of having early conversations in partnership with families, it cannot be overstated. I think I did at that time, often rely on our legal and formal authority as a school district to do these things, when in reality, these are other people's kids. And what we really, in those kinds of situations, having early conversations, early meetings about how things are going, how's it going on your end, soliciting feedback. And if I had to just distill it into a talking point, it was a one-way conversation that should have been a very fluid two-way conversation. We ended up going through a legal process. That family had an attorney. We ended up doing some testing, and that student stayed in our school system and was probably, I know they've graduated at this point, but I think back and I think, had that student gone to that placement, would that student have graduated? And if they didn't, that would have been on me. So always approaching these situations now. I had a conversation with the principal of a third grader yesterday. This needs to be looked at. Like, how do we keep the student moving towards graduation? I know they're 9. This boy was also 9, but that is the goal. And I was really fortunate to work for my first superintendent directly as a principal. I remember, we were going to have a hearing, a superintendent's hearing on this, or a legal hearing on this student. And I remember it very well. It was Veterans Day of that school year. We were having a late 60, 70 degree day. I was doing yard work. She called me. And I think I was in this mode of like, I worked so hard with this and I really just want what's best for my building. And she just, as she had a way of doing, stopped me and said, listen, this is all about how do we get this kid to graduate.
So I think what's really interesting here is that you have, no doubt, as a principal, and certainly as a superintendent, a lot of voices saying, I'm responsible for the education of the other 25 kids in this classroom. Mm-hmm. We have tried everything. We've done behavior plans. We have tried tutoring younger students. We have tried walk and talks. We have tried everything we could possibly do. And the child is regularly being picked up by a parent, and it's not fair. Oh, and I'm hearing from the parents of other children. So that is another piece that is really stressful for the classroom teacher, for the building principal, and for the system as a whole. And it's interesting to me, I'm going to ask you about what got overlooked, having also been in these shoes. Not one person listening to this podcast has not been in a very similar situation to that situation, mm-hmm. Larry, where they are compelled to try to fix something without first thinking about what can I do to possibly sort of help this family that no doubt is in crisis, because they're in crisis and that every day they're picking up their child and they don't have the answers either. Right. So what got overlooked? What would you say was overlooked in this situation?
The biggest piece that I think I overlooked, and I don't know if I overlooked it or I did not have the leadership experience or, quite frankly, the mature life experience to realize exactly what you just said, that this was a family that was experiencing some crisis. And there's an empathy involved in our leadership that really could have come to the fore there and could have, again, been back to that, what I talked about, that fluid two-way conversation. I think the mother involved certainly was doing all the right things looking back on it. I don't think there was anything they could do. I do think there were some things that we could have done better as a school system when it comes to neurodiverse students. And I think we still can, quite frankly, as I see, and as the father of a neurodiverse student, I've learned a lot from that experience. But I think what got overlooked was empathy. As pained to say that, this is 13 years ago, as pained as I am to say that right now, it's bringing back that flood of emotions about it. I didn't have the requisite level of empathy to think about what was best for everyone in the situation. And by everyone, I mean the child. Because you're right, those other pressures were there. The teacher was having their instruction disrupted. The children in the class were having their instruction disrupted. The building was being disrupted. It was taking a lot of people's time. And, at the end of the day, I think that empathy piece was overlooked.
Yeah. My gosh, I can totally see parents taking to social media saying, I heard everybody had to step out of the classroom because of a child. I won't use their name, but this is what's happening, kind of thing. So, Wow. What did you learn about relationships?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I learned was that I have to stop focusing on trying to be right as much as I was. Again, I was a young leader. I had been put in this position. I had people tapping me on the shoulder. I certainly could have been a lot more humble. Certainly am a lot more humble now than I was as a young up and coming. You're in this position. Oh my gosh, you must be doing everything right to get there kind of thing. And I've been in the right place at the right time a lot. All of our careers, that tends to be a factor, whether we want to recognize it or not. But that was the biggest thing that I could have done differently, was had not been focused on trying to win the conversations and really given some space. Marshall Goldsmith talks about winning all the time as what got you there. What got you here won't get you there. And I think when we're focused so much on winning the conversation, we're not listening empathically. We're listening to respond rather than listening to understand. And just that space to have those conversations doesn't exist. You and I'm sure you have, I know I have, on the daily, been in a conversation with someone who's clearly trying to win the conversation.
They're waiting for you to stop talking so they can tell you.
And you feel it emotionally.
The speech and debate tactic.
There's no space to have a conversation here, and that's difficult.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking of this image of a parent and a child both looking at a pet shop window. This image comes from the Waters Center Habits of Systems Thinking cards. So they're both looking at this dog, and the child is thinking, oh my gosh, I love this dog. I'm going to really want this dog. And the parent is thinking, oh my God, this dog's really expensive. It's the mindset kind of thing. And, they're both looking at the same situation with radically different perspectives. And so I was thinking of that in relation to your situation where your legal team, the district's legal team is saying the alternative school is the solution that this child needs. And the alternative school is being perceived as, from the parent's perspective, of you're just ending my child. You've decided that my child's needs, that you've given up on my child. Yeah. Wow. What do you think could have been done differently?
So I'm reflecting upon that moment, or that set of moments where that situation played out. And I'm thinking about what happened prior. And so not even getting to that moment could have been done differently. And I'll tell you that I thinking about what came out of the situation, that was positive. We became much better as a school. And I would not just say as our building, but then I became assistant superintendent and so in charge of our secondary school. So I saw this student pretty much through their until I left that district when he was in his teens. I know we got a lot better at educating his needs, teaching into those needs rather than reacting to them as a result of that situation. And I guess my regret is just that it took that cathartic moment to get there versus us realizing that if we do A, B, and C now, we'll never get there. And I think that's where I've gotten a lot better as a leader.
Yeah.
Because now by the time these things get to me, typically there's something going on down the road. One thing I've learned is whenever there's I take a parent phone call, they come to me, or when I was an assistant superintendent, or even as a principal, typically there's some negative school experience that they'd had personally or that they've experienced with their child that is causing them to view that situation as you're giving up on my kid, or heck no, this isn't happening on this bus. And certainly I'm not saying that things shouldn't be addressed that are happening, but their reaction is often based on that. So having some more positive experiences beforehand with this student, with this family, would have prevented us from even being in that moment.
So I always end with, in the end, what was something that was good that came out of this situation? As I'm hearing you describe the situation, a couple of things come to mind. I wonder if they are true. One, as you continue to grow within the system and grow with your experiences, you were able to build better systems so that as a child was struggling, you were able to consider what might be some interventions system-wide, not just, every child's an individual and they may need individual intervention. However, it's sort of a menu of options that are now possible for you. And thinking about taking a step back and empathizing with the family and helping others learn to do the same thing. I learned recently that individuals are really able to empathize, but they don't do it naturally. They almost have to be compelled to do it. And once asked to empathize, hey, what do you think this family is thinking right now or feeling right now? And then it's amazing the kinds of conversations that can happen as you're problem solving.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, what was something that was good that came out of the situation for you?
So I resonate a lot with what you just said. So my 7th grade son is a big technology guy. And by that, I mean, he likes to play games, but he's more interested in how that computer looks under the hood, and can he manipulate it to be a Mac when it's a PC and download this? So I remember when he was young, he'd always talk about, I gotta change the default setting. And they got me thinking about human beings. Like, we all have a default setting. If we go through our day in our default setting, I don't care if you're the nicest person in the world, you're going to get upset at the person who's cutting you off on the highway. You're just going to be reacting all the time. So I think we have to be cognizant of what our default setting is and fight against it. And in this situation, as I look back on it, I don't think I would have worded it that way in 2012 or 2013, but it was, how do we overcome the default setting? Not just with ourselves as leaders, but the solution that we thought for this student was a technical solution. A behavior happened, they're going to be suspended, they're going somewhere else. What it required was an adaptive solution. How do we collaborate to create a set of circumstances that gets us out of this pattern? And I think we all know in schools, technical solutions are tried all the time. Like, the same kid could get detention 3 times a week for their whole career. The behavior hasn't changed. So that technical solution clearly doesn't work. So I think getting out of the technical solutions over time has been a lesson. I don't think I would have expressed it that way back then, but as I reflect on it now, that's what comes to mind.
I am totally stealing the default. I love that.
Yeah. Tyler
That was
won't charge you. As far as I know, he hasn't charged me yet.
Okay, good. Well, let him know. I mean, every time I say it, I'm happy to send a cent.
He would take an old laptop, and he's 12 now. So this is what, he's 8.
Yeah.
And then he would go back to the default setting and he would do something else with it. I was thinking, with computers, we can just go back to factory settings.
Right. Well, and think about it. So the way that we've all been socialized in terms of our beliefs, our principles and values, that really is our default setting.
Internal biases, right? Like, we all have biases as human beings, and we've got
That's
to fight.
fantastic.
Yep.
My guest today was Dr. Larry Dake, the Superintendent of Schools for the Chenango Valley Central School District in Binghamton, New York. And Larry, I'm so thrilled that we got to spend some time together. I was texting with a friend of mine who happens to be this week with the superintendent from Springfield, Ohio. So can you imagine the kind of absolute crisis management that he is having to negotiate and navigate? And I thought about, as you were talking, and no doubt the superintendent of Springfield, Ohio has got this in the bag, the value of relationship. This was so important. This is what you said. And then I unpacked that in my mind as you were talking about, you used words like trusting the people that you work with. You talked about balance to some extent, of trying to balance your work and your professional and your personal life, and knowing that that is sometimes a fruitless endeavor. So being mindful of those weeks where you are putting more time into work, that the following week looking to find some adjustments so that your family knows that they're as important as the work that you're doing. You talked about family, you talked about students, you talked about teachers, and valuing and honoring and lifting up their voices. I love the fact that in your office, that you're able to step out and you do this regularly, I can totally tell, to really harvest the wisdom of the people within your school system. And you talked about communication, and then you ended with empathy. And so all of that wrapped into this word of relationship. What a joy to spend time with you.
I really enjoyed it myself. And again, it's, as you know, in these positions, we rarely have the opportunity to stop in the moment and think about the why, but I'm going to leave this conversation really energized. I'm going to get out there when we're done, and there's going to be students and staff, and it's going to be fantastic. So thank you.
Okay, we're back. I know there's a lot to talk about. Let's go with the first thing on your mind.
This concept of complicated problems. I loved your definition of complicated problems, by the way. I thought that was super cool. It has an answer, it's just hard to get there. I love that answer. I did not like your answer for complex problems.
Oh, really? I was ready. I was like, I wish people could see me because as you said, complicated, you liked it. I was like, well, look at me. And then I thought he's going to now follow with, well done on complex.
No, complex was worse. Yeah.
Well, it couldn't have been better since you didn't like it. So of course it was worse.
It was, you said there was no right.
There is no, nobody's happy with complex.
Yeah, I loved that. That's better. Like, because you said it has a meaningful solution. Complex problems don't. Yes.
Then I'd like to retract that. What I typically say is complicated is hard, but it typically has an answer.
Yeah.
Complex is there's no clear answer and nobody's happy. An easy one for superintendents out there would be snow days. They are complex because there's so much to consider, and you're going to make the very best decision. And half your community says you're a moron, and half your community says, thank you so much for prioritizing the safety of children and the staff who work for you. And so it's a lose-lose proposition. The pandemic being like a snow day on steroids, day in and day out, just every complex. Day. Wow, I didn't realize that I had said it that way. Well, I'm glad you called me on it.
Yeah, you and I are in total agreement. Yeah, exactly. In fact, I love the snow day example as people think it's a technical decision. Well, it's just whether there's snow or not. It's a certain amount of snow.
Yeah.
And then
you have to think about
crazy measurements.
Exactly. Did it snow the day before? How cold was it the day before? Will the ground hold the snow because it's frozen? Yeah. Will it melt and then refreeze? Are you on gravel roads? Do you have bridges? What about the rest?
How many culverts? It's the bus and the culverts.
Yep. Like how many cul-de-sacs do you have? Exactly. Do you have first tier, second tier, 3 tiers of plowing? Look, this is like my bread and butter because I got so good at communicating every bit of it that people were like, okay. Because I had maps.
You want transparency? Here you go.
I gave it more than anything. Although one time we decided to have school. Some were not happy. And so I was at the bus stop with my kid. It was really cold. And so we took a selfie and I said, we're waiting for the bus. Have a great day, everyone. And in Missouri, the word bullying means that if you say the word bullying, an investigation has to be completed. And so a parent filed a bullying claim against me for bullying my child at the bus stop, which meant that since there's no one above me other than the board had to evaluate whether or not I had bullied a child at the bus stop. So, yeah, complex.
That's such a good example.
I want to circle back to a question you asked me, and I left it right before I started the conversation with Larry, and now I'm going to come back to it. You asked me what is something that I had as a default setting that I did change.
Yeah.
I would say my take or stance on the inclusion of children with special needs who typically have attended district-wide classrooms to permit, to advocate for their inclusion in mainstream classrooms, particularly when parents are asking for it. I would say that was a default that was pretty strong that I've been willing to think through and think differently. So if I were ever in a superintendency position again, that I would likely have a different approach.
That's very difficult to shift. It's really hard. This is why systems don't change. Human beings' default settings are very difficult to shift.
What is something that you do as part of the equity collaborative?
We do everything that was shared by Larry, that we listen and we empathize. And we create a way of sharing what we've heard and create empathy for the board, for the district leaders to have them understand what the experience is like in their system. You said you think your system should do X, Y, and Z, that this is how kids and families should feel and what they should be getting. And here's what they say they're getting. Do they match? Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. When they don't, how do you feel about that? Almost always, everybody's like, not good. I don't want that to be true. Your phrasing of the cultural field, I think you used a phrase more than once. I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's great. It's similar to the way in which other folks talk about what I would say is from cultural sync, cultural connection, cultural understanding or cultural relevance or whatever. But the idea why I like the word field better is it indicates, I said, recognizing the cultural field and the small habits that create it is step one. The second would be identify the habits that need to be interrupted to change it. Because you talked about small habits, and exactly, that's all it is. To change within a system, you can't go set an audacious goal, but the things you change are small. The goal's huge, and the goal has to be specific, but change small things. For example, put your superintendent's office in the middle of the school. Do that. It will create a huge disruption.
That's a really good example. Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, Jamie, this has been great.
See you next week.
I'm Peter Stiepelman.
I'm Jamie Mansan.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print-inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode on Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.